So I'm Sheriff Ian Parkinson, the Sheriff of San Luis Obispo County. I'm joined here today by Paso Robles Police Chief Ty Lewis and also CHP Chief LD Maples, to my right. There are many others that wish to be here, but we still have a lot of work to do, so they were unable to be here today. So the reason we called this press conference is to give you an update. Give you an update of what occurred starting yesterday in our active shooter incident that occurred downtown Paso Robles. Let me begin by saying that this incident is over. The suspect is deceased. Following my press conference yesterday afternoon, the Sheriff's Office and personnel from allied agencies continued our investigation into the shooting that occurred at approximately 3 a.m. the previous night at the police department and resulted in the shooting of a San Luis Obispo Sheriff's deputy in the head. Last night we knew that we needed an increase in police presence in the area as we continue to look for the suspect in the shooting. Last night at approximately 10:20, the Paso Robles Police Department received a report of shots fired in the area of the 200 block of Spring Street. Officers arrived on scene to investigate. They saw the suspect matching Lyra's description, and he fled from them into a nearby apartment complex. Officers surrounded the complex in the area with the resources they had at the time. And unfortunately, Lyra escaped through the riverbed south, as we determined a short time later. The suspect was again encountered down at Ramada in Highway 46. Lyra, the suspect, was spotted and fired several shots at officers that responded, and once again retreated back into the riverbed. Overnight, law enforcement officers were summoned. We used the assistance of the FBI SWAT team to assist, along with many other agencies, to contain the area of the riverbed. If you're familiar with the riverbed, it's very large and very long, and we believe that we had the suspect contained in that area. However, it was a very large area. This morning we made plans to begin our search of the riverbed, and so we summoned assistance. We received assistance from the Kern County Sheriff's Office, the FBI again, the regional SWAT team, and Kings County Sheriffs, to name a few. Our plan was pretty straightforward yet complex in the sense that we knew we had to search a very large area with a very dangerous person that was already wanted for suspicion of a murder of a resident and also the shooting of the deputy sheriff and the shooting at other police officers. Our plan was to begin a systematic search beginning in the riverbed area adjacent to the fairgrounds. The reason why we wanted to begin at the fairgrounds was because that seemed to be the place that we had spotted him before. We believed it was a good spot for the perimeter that we had set up. And we intended to search all the way down from that area of the fairgrounds all the way down to Templeton High School, which is south of us here at this station. We had formulated the plan, and the most critical part of the plan is that we did not want the suspect escaping into any of the neighborhoods in Paso Robles or in Templeton because of the danger that he posed to ordinary citizens and to law enforcement. So we sat on it overnight. We had the perimeter contained. We began moving resources in to implement our plan. and the suspect, who was hiding nearby one of our containment units, began firing at officers on the perimeter. They struck an Arroyo Grande sergeant that was in town to assist. He struck him in the calf. It was a through-and-through wound to his calf. He was taken from the scene to the hospital where he was treated for his injury. As soon as that shooting started, we summoned all the deputies and officers that we had at the command post at the fairgrounds, immediately went to the area to contain a much smaller area to begin searching and apprehending the suspect. After we were all in place and began to implement a plan to begin a safe search, the suspect came out of hiding, began to crawl up a short embankment in between two of our containment units. They immediately spotted him coming from the brush, and he reached a short hill I would probably describe as just probably 5 to 8 feet, but steep. He reached the top of it and immediately began to run into the vineyard where the hill was next to. The suspect was shot, and during the shooting, two more officers were injured. One, a California Highway Patrol officer, was shot in the bulletproof vest. A second, deputy sheriff from Kings County, got out of the armored vehicle to rescue the CHP officer that had just been shot, and was shot himself just above his knee. Both of those officers were transported immediately to local hospitals for treatment. It's good to say that both have non-life-threatening injuries, and both are expected to recover. Detectives discovered 2 loaded handguns on the suspect that we believe were taken in a commercial burglary that occurred the day before the deputy shooting in the city of San Luis Obispo. I'm going to now turn it over to the chief to describe further.
Good evening. Just wanted to update everybody a little bit on the homicide investigation that has been linked to this particular incident as well. So the investigation on that is continuing. At this point, our primary suspect is Mr. Vera. We were able to recover evidence at the scene that linked the firearms used in the siege on the police department, and that was used to shoot the deputy on the morning of our incident. We believe that all of those are linked, but however the investigation is still continuing. I also want to say a couple words to a few specific groups this evening. First, it's not lost upon, I think, the sheriff or myself what happened today to Mr. Vera and his family. Our thoughts and our prayers are with his family. It's going to be a tough time for them dealing with everything that's gone on. I also want to everybody in the community to pray for our law enforcement officers that were injured during this. They're heroes, and they need to be recognized as such. It's been a long couple of weeks for the cities in this community, for the county. There's been a lot of fear, a lot of anger, and I think it's a quintessential moment in time right now where it really stood up and showed what our community is made of. Our law enforcement officers have been working pretty much around the clock for the last 2 weeks, and it culminated with these tragic events that have been unfolding over the last couple of days. There was officers from every agency in this county here today. They all banded together to protect the community, and it really does kind of reflect the best of what our county is made of in the law enforcement ranks and in professionalism, and I hope that the community recognizes that. Lastly, I want to thank the community directly. I can probably speak for Sheriff Parkinson and myself. We've been flooded with messages of support, praying for us, thinking about us, encouraging us, and I know that the community has felt a lot of angst and a lot of fear, and I'm glad that this is finally over. It's been really a tough go, but with that, I'll turn it back to Sheriff Parkinson, and we can answer any questions.
I just would like to add to what Chief Lewis said about the community. We were here this morning, first thing, and a local business owner came and offered a large bag of coffee for the deputies here, and that's not the first and the last that where the community has come and said how much they support and love their departments. This is a tough time for us. We're hoping to get through it. We still have a tremendous amount to do right now with this investigation. There's a lot of information that we cannot divulge right now simply because we don't have the answers for you. The investigation will continue. It will continue through the night. We have an officer-involved shooting to investigate. We have a homicide to continue to investigate. We have a tremendous amount of physical evidence to process at the scene and also to evaluate. So that will be ongoing throughout the night tonight. We're hoping that we can let the scene or people have access to the scene area again, but I would expect that's not going to be probably until tomorrow morning. And lastly, I just would like to also say that thank you to all of the law enforcement agencies. We worked incredibly well together during a very difficult time. It's very difficult, I can say, for my deputies and even the officers that have worked with my deputies when one of your own is shot and hospitalized and is in serious condition. You know, we posted the picture and released the officer's name this morning. As you can see, he's a young man that has a bright future, and we're glad that thus far that he is going to be doing okay. Also to the other officers that were wounded today, it takes a lot of courage to be out when you know you have somebody that's willing to kill an innocent person on the street and shoot a deputy sheriff in the head when they don't even know them. So I'm grateful, I'm proud of all the law enforcement agencies in this county for remaining professional and putting their life on the line to be out here and protect the community. So with that, I open it up to any questions you might have.
Is there any indication that there was more being planned, or perhaps this was connected to shootings up north in Santa Cruz County and Oakland as well?
Well, first about the connections to up north, meaning Santa Cruz or maybe Oakland. We have no indication at this point that they are connected. That we do know that our suspect did spend time in the Santa Cruz area, but we have no indication that there was a connection. The second part of the first part about being planned, absolutely. This was planned. This was a planned ambush on the police department, and it was a plan that the officers would come out and that the suspect would engage them. And the reason I know that is because it happened over about an hour and a half period of time with the suspect moving and not trying to flee. If it was a simple attempt to vandalize, the suspect would have shot at the station and immediately fled the area. But he remained waiting for officers to arrive, officers to come out, and he shot him just like he shot my deputy from a dark corner of the community when my deputies arrived and got out of their car. So I think it was absolutely planned, and he intended to continue. Obviously, he shot another deputy today, with the deputy not even knowing where he was hiding, and the search was not being conducted at the time. They were simply maintaining a perimeter to make sure that the suspect didn't get loose in the community, and they were once again shot from the bushes and hiding to an unsuspecting officer. Unfortunately, that's not life-threatening injury, but nonetheless, you know, being shot is a very traumatic event in your life. And that officer, regardless of whether he heals physically, he still has to live with that for the rest of his career.
Can you touch on the search of the storm drain next to the movie theater?
Yes. So the question was touched on the storm drain next to the movie theater. We discovered today that there was a small entry next to the movie theater that was accessible physically. And you know what? I'm actually, Chief Lewis will probably do a better job describing it, so I'm going to let him finish. That was just an open.
I think he's getting tired. So yes, we did receive information. Our police department was dispatched out to the theater there in downtown Paso Robles regarding a location that might be linked to the suspect in this particular case. We were directed to an area of a wall that was near the courtyard of the theater. It was located behind some shrubbery, and there was a grate that was across it. Apparently there was some repair work being done there, and part of that repair work, the repairman noticed that there was likely a transient camp inside of that little, almost like a basement area underneath the building. So we went out there and we discovered that that is likely the place that Mr. Lira had been hiding out over the last several days or living. We found several items of evidence within there that linked Mr. Lira to the commercial burglary that Sheriff Parkinson referred to in San Luis Obispo, and other items of evidence. Of course, Mr. Lira wasn't there, but that's the information that we have about that location.
Can I just add, I want to add something to that's important. The storm drain entry is very difficult to see and truly understand that somebody could get under there or what's under there. Typically, if you look under a building, it's a crawl space and not something that somebody could inhabit. That was a little bit different. There was space and quite a bit of space. On the opposite end of the building that small room was connected to was another steel grate. That steel grate was clearly visible and was locked. The night that we had been searching for Lira, officers and law enforcement did check that and look in that grate with flashlights. Saw nothing, saw no obvious way of entering that, being unknown to them that the other grate was accessible. I just feel very fortunate that our officers did not either spook him, or if he was there, that he did not decide to shoot those officers, because he would have had probably clear shots at law enforcement from that position of really covering concealment.
It may sound like a silly question, but yesterday you called his actions cowardly. What were your feelings today when you're hearing that your suspect was captured and killed?
Well, I stand by that. He was cowardly. He hid in the bushes or hid in the night and shot at and shot one of my deputies in the head. I think that is a sign of being a coward. I think today was another act of that. Shooting from the bushes and wounding another officer, to me, again, the same act. That doesn't mean that the outcome we wanted was how it ended today. As a matter of fact, you may recall Chief Lewis yesterday stated that we wanted him to turn himself in. We wanted family to turn himself in. We wanted a peaceful ending to this. That is not our job to pronounce sentence. And we were hoping nothing more than for him to finally give up, come out of the bushes, come out of hiding and say, I give up. And that didn't happen. But he, again, unprovoked attack, not only on our officer, but last night shooting in an area that easily could have injured another citizen. I feel that he's the one that made that decision and forced our hand to make our decision.
And do you have any sense of motive, or did he say anything, or do you have any idea of his mental state during this episode?
We don't yet. We could all we could all guess, but the reality right now is that's part of our investigation, looking into his background, interviewing other people. Even though it ended today like this, we cannot conclude our investigations without completing them, and that includes the homicide, but also includes us determining what was the root cause of this, if we can determine. Motive is always a very important item in any investigation, so we'll continue to try to determine what the motivation was that he would want to shoot this innocent person and shoot law enforcement.
Were the two handguns you found from him today the same weapons he used to shoot the police department and your deputy at 119?
We know they're the same calibers. They're two different caliber weapons. They were both caliber that we found at the scene where the officers were shot at and the deputy shot, and also at the scene where the victim was murdered.
Aside from motive, what can you tell us about his mental health?
That's going to go to motive as well. We're really kind of scratching the surface. As you know, as we began the investigation yesterday, we didn't have a suspect, so we spent much of the day trying to determine who this person was, which meant collecting a tremendous amount of videotape, images throughout the city that were captured, then trying to figure out who the person was. I think one of the things that struck both the chief and I after this press conference, when we actually released the picture, oftentimes when you have somebody that's local, people start calling, whether they are friends or whether they are enemies. The fact is people want a peaceful ending, and sometimes they call not because they're an enemy, they want them to surrender, they want it to end peacefully. When you don't get calls like that, it tends to be an indication that your suspect might not be here. So we began, continuing exploring who this person was, and just yesterday afternoon, that was discovered. So it really changed the dynamic of the investigation where we were, and then it was a matter of trying to find him, and now we have a tremendous amount of work to do in focusing in on him and what possibly was the motivation for all this. It was really focused on keeping the community safe, making sure nobody else got hurt, and locating him as fast as possible, and that the other motive stuff tends to follow.
Sheriff, how were you able to identify him as you got him?
Well, Chief?
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, we had a lot of support from a lot of outside agencies. The Sheriff's Department brought all his resources to bear. I brought all mine in my department, plus we had all the rest of the municipalities helping us. We started putting out images that we shared with you yesterday when we asked for help, and outside law enforcement agency up north of us in the Santa Cruz and Monterey area began sending some pictures of a suspect that they thought was possibly ours, that had previous law enforcement contacts, and we immediately started vetting that information and positively identified him.
Do you know how long he's been in this area?
We suspect, based upon at least the preliminary information that we have, maybe up to a week.
Can I just add something, just kind of to give you a good description of how the investigation works. When we started out that morning trying to identify him, we received some information through my custody division. Obviously, when somebody comes in, they're classified and that remain in custody. We took the images that we had from video that we recovered, had them look at it, and they actually came up with we thought was a very viable suspect. We did a full vetting of that person and actually determined it wasn't him. And that's what an investigation is. Sometimes, you identify somebody you think might be the person responsible, and